Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Erich Kurschat. I am the owner of Harmony Insights LLC, a company that allows me to work with organizations and consultants using the DISC personality assessment. Many of you know me as a DISC nerd, and I come by it honestly. I am also the founder of HR Hot Seat, an inclusive mastermind community of real HR pros solving real HR problems. We have over 2,500 members in 10 different licensed chapters around the country. And so if you are an HR professional yourself or you serve HR professionals, I'd love to have you involved, all for free at hrhotseat.com. We're doing everything online these days. Everything is virtual, from our events to our forum areas and so much more. So you can find out more at hrhotseat.com. Today is what I call a Harmony Insights lunch date. And a couple of weeks ago, I decided that I was going to start inviting people who inspire me to spend 30 minutes of my lunch hour in Central Time having some inspiring conversation where I can then move into my afternoon ready to do my best work. And I decided to invite some other folks along for these conversations, and they've been so popular, so well received, and so inspiring to me and so many others over the course of the past few weeks. So I'm excited to keep them going. And today's special guest is Maryanne Spatola from C3 Talent Strategies. Maryanne, welcome to today's lunch date.
Yes, thanks so much for having me, Eric. I have been following your lunch date series, and they have been absolutely phenomenal. You have some really great guest speakers and a terrific following on your audience, and great conversations that I think have just been tremendously helpful to a lot of people. So
Great.
thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And thank you for saying that. People know this. I've gone out to people, and rather than showing up with an agenda, I've said to my special guests, what are you most passionate about? What would you like to talk about? Something timely and beneficial to our audience and relevant. And Maryanne showed up with a topic that we are calling Imagining a New World of Work. Would you mind giving our audience today a sense of who you are and where you have come from, what positions you well for this conversation about the future of work?
Awesome. Sure, happy to do that. I had kind of an eclectic career. I started on the property casualty insurance side, had a number of operation positions. I was a computer programmer at one point.
I
But
don't know
then
if I realized that.
oh yeah, is that hilarious? I fell into and fell in love with HR when I worked for a startup, and we had double-digit growth for a decade. And we had no HR when I got there. We had a woman doing payroll, a woman doing benefits, and an attorney handling all of our ER issues. So we built HR from the ground up. I fell into it, fell in love with it, stayed with it the rest of my career. My specialty ended up being more in the talent management space, developing people, building talent management functions, worked with a lot of CEOs on their executive team, connecting the business to talent, so the apex of talent and strategy. And that really became my wheelhouse. My last position before I exited corporate America was a chief human resource officer. So I checked the box on the top of my career in my field, and I decided to go launch my own firm, which is C3 Talent Strategies. And so we have three verticals. I do strategic HR planning. We have a experience called the Accelerator, which we think will be tremendously helpful to HR people at this time, trying to figure out where to take their organization next. And then I have a virtual leadership experience. It's a platform, digital platform that we call Leadership Incubator. So that's a whole lot of fun. And then I do a lot of coaching and facilitation. I am a PC certified executive coach. So those are kind of my three business pieces. And they're tied together with my attachment to academia. I'm an adjunct professor at NYU in New York City, Columbia in New York City, as well as Rutgers in their executive ed arm. So I like to have one foot in academia, stay current on the research and the theory and what's happening, and then I like to bring that to practical experience, having been an HR professional.
Wonderful.
So that's
And
my sweet spot.
thank you for that overview. We're going to include, as a follow-up email, blind copying all attendees, we're going to include links to resources that you share today, including hopefully to some of the things that you've already mentioned that you're doing, because I know it'll be valuable to folks. I've started out these conversations by asking you just briefly if you're willing to share. COVID-19 and coronavirus has impacted us all in some way. Are you willing to share just briefly how you have personally been impacted by what's going on right now?
Yeah, I think, it's a global issue for sure. For me personally, I started moving my business to the digital world last summer,
Mhm.
um, because that's really where the market has been going in that leadership space, even in the coaching space for a long time. And personally, making a physical move.
Mhm.
So I'm moving away from New York City, but wanted to be able to keep my ties. So I moved to online teaching in the academic world. So that was my push anyway. But for me, I'm actually busier than I've ever been
Mhm.
because I have clients who have made a complete 180 pivot. They had a deliberate and intentional in person business model.
Mhm.
And so when COVID hit, their choice was pivot to offering digital experiences, and it's a membership based organization, or we're going to be out of business.
Right.
And so a lot of my clients find themselves in that space. Academia was in the same space. Everything went completely online. So I've been pretty busy trying to help organizations um, learn how to be successful in the virtual environment, how they can reshape their business models to be viable in the business market. And like we're going to talk about today, what does this new world look like?
Yeah.
What is that, hybrid workforce, workplace begin to look like as we make a reentry post COVID?
So you and I met initially in the hacking HR community, and that has been built by Enrique Rubio with the help of thousands of
Oh my
people.
gosh. And what a great
um,
community.
yeah, countless chapters around the world at this
Yeah.
point. So such an inspiring person himself. But that was my introduction to this conversation, to
Yep.
the future of work and HR technology, and not only as HR professionals, how we're contributing, but just in general, how we are going
Mhm.
to interact with this new world of work, which as I say it, sounds like such a high level philosophical, you know, broad conversation, and it can be at times. Um, for purposes of this conversation between now and 12:30 Central Time today, what is
Yeah.
going to be our focus for this version of the new world of work? What are we going to
Yeah,
spend today talking about? Just so people
you're
know right up
so
front.
right. Yeah, absolutely. I've been on this speaking tour about this topic for almost 2 years. And it is exactly that. The reaction has commonly been not me, not yet. It's overwhelming. I don't know what to do with it. But our current reality is it's here. We went to a digital world in like 72 hours. And
Mhm.
so we've moved from let's think about it to here it is and let's do it. And that's just one aspect of it, right? So I think our new reality is the future's here. It's been accelerated.
It's no longer a
Um,
hypothetical.
it's
We
no
were
longer
dealing with it.
hypothetical.
Yeah.
Exactly right. We are
Yeah.
dealing with this real time, real issues right now that we have to get ready for. And my hope is that the valuable lessons we can take from COVID, from the changes we've been required to make, we don't lose the value in it, right? So we don't just open the doors and go back to what we used to do.
Right.
What did we learn? What can we take back? Where did the innovation come to light that we found new opportunities? That client I was mentioning, they have 6 new offerings for their clients that they never would have had before. And they're
Mhm.
booming. They have wait lists
Right.
for their new products. So, our fundamental changes are going to occur. I read an article, and I'll share this when we do the follow up. I believe it was Inc. magazine, where they were talking about, this long term significant ripple effect COVID will have on the business world in general.
Mhm.
And the closing paragraph, the author described it as our businesses have been irrevocably changed. And
Mhm.
it just stuck with me because I think that's where we are. Our challenge is how do we discover what those opportunities are and really bring them to life?
In times of challenge and crisis myself, I like to ask the question, what does this make available? And I'll
Yeah.
be honest, that's a little bit more optimistic and resourceful than Eric has been in the past. I've had to learn to adopt that perspective. But when you start asking, what does this make possible, even when things seem destitute and completely turned upside down, it really changes your perspective. I
It
know
totally
we
does.
have probably a mix of people who are leaders in their fields today, practitioners that are going to be shepherding others through this process of change management and transition management. We also have some folks who are in job transition, probably, who are thinking, how
Hmm.
am I going to fit in to how things are going to look going forward? We're going to touch on, I think, briefly work from home and also return to work. We have put together just a very quick poll. If people are interested in participating, it's anonymous, and it asks, do you belong to a brick and mortar business that plans to reopen in the next 30 to 60 days? So you can answer yes or no to that as we continue on. Maryanne, what are some
Yeah.
of the very specific challenges that you feel our audience may be faced with today as they consider the future of work, and
Hmm.
honestly what the next however many weeks and months are going to
It's going to look like, yeah.
look for
I
them?
think that I would put it into kind of three big buckets.
Uh-huh.
First is the physical space. What is that going to look like? I presented at a conference last June in Boston for a corporate real estate organization. And so I'm on their, I follow some of their folks and I'm on their communication channels, their publications. And there have been quite a few recent publications with visual redesigns of what will our physical space look like. Cubicles that are now 6 feet apart. Conference rooms don't exist anymore because nobody wants to sit right next to somebody in a meeting for 3 hours in a closed room.
Right.
So there's that element of it, and that is both for organizations and for us as human beings. What is the physical space that you want to be in, where you're going to feel safe and okay to go to work, right? And for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people who've been in this virtual world, they don't want to go back to brick and mortar.
Mm-hmm.
It's working for them. They love it. They've been asking for it. Here it is. And they're not willing to give it up. And others really do want that physical proximity, like being in an office space. So it's going to be a mixed bag. But I think for organizations and for us as individuals, there's a lot to consider.
I'll add
This,
to this, health and safety aside, you and I have
yeah,
had conversations just in terms of personality style. Those of us who identify with being on the more introverted side of things,
yeah,
we may not want to go back for entirely different reasons.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I had somebody, I did a interview the other day and the gal was an extreme introvert. And she described it as, I let the phone go to email so I can pick it up and go to voicemail so I can pick it up and send an email. So she doesn't even have to answer the phone, just like
Right.
craziness.
People know one of my
Um,
favorite memes says, introverts unite
yeah,
just separately and in your own homes. And so what we're doing now is actually very comfortable to some of us. So when I think
absolutely.
about if I were a more traditionally employed worker, which I'm not, I actually do work from home, an arrangement that works really well for me. But when I think about, okay, were I to be thrust back suddenly into this world where now my calendar is filled in different ways, and I'm now,
Yeah.
taking
Hmm.
public transportation into an office, that is going to be, could potentially be jarring for me.
Oh,
Whereas
sure.
someone else may be very inspired by it and very excited to get back to
Yeah,
how
that's
things
right.
were, or
Yeah,
some version of that going forward.
exactly
So what's
right.
another
I
bucket? You
think,
said one bucket is the physical space.
yep.
What's the second
I
bucket?
think the other bucket is just operationally. Our business models may have shifted, like that client I described, or we're going to have these hybrid physical spaces, virtual spaces, right? Now we're going to have a distributed workforce in greater ways than we've ever had before. How do you make that all work, right? How do you make sure we keep engagement levels high? How do we make sure if we have new remote employees, how do we onboard them?
Hmm.
How do we make sure we still have culture that we want to have, even if we're not all in the same building, right?
Hmm.
All of those operational aspects are going to come into play. And the third bucket is leadership. which I think is going to be, for me, I'm a leadership geek, so
Hmm.
that's my space, but it's going to be a fascinating kind of case study to watch, right? We know micromanagement never worked. It didn't work in bricks and mortar. Certainly isn't working in the virtual world. So helping leaders really understand what the differences are of how you behave and show up, virtual space, physical space, when you have a more digitally mature organization and environment, right?
Hmm.
It's a different way to show up as a leader. I think those are the three buckets for me.
And when you say leaders, I think it's worth clarifying because people use the word leaders in different ways.
They
When
do.
you're talking about leaders, are you talking about the highest executive levels of an organization?
Not necessarily. Leadership for me is about getting results through others, right? You're not a one man band. You're not just the individual contributor pushing out results. You're getting results through others. And
Mhm.
so for me, it doesn't necessarily mean title or hierarchy.
Mm.
We know now with organizational network analysis that we can find people who get the work done and help others get the work done. They're not on your org chart. They're somewhere else in the organization, right? So it's a lot of informal relationships sometimes too. But that leader is the person who can articulate a vision, big V or little v, could be just a vision for the project, right?
Yeah,
It's people who can align and get people rallied around what that vision is. So they want to join the party and get it done. And they know how to champion the execution. They know how to make sure they follow through with it.
yeah,
They can set good standards, that they're monitoring, not micromanaging people,
yeah.
right? And just making sure things get done.
You're using a language that's very familiar to me. The work of
Work of
leaders.
leaders.
Yeah.
My favorite.
When we're talking DISC, we talk about the work of leaders
Yep.
being crafting a vision, aligning people with the vision, and executing on it. And so I think any conversation around leadership at any level can involve those three things, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
As a starting
Absolutely.
point anyway.
Yeah.
Let me I'm going to end the poll and show you and others what our results are. If you're able to see them, it looks like
Wow.
29% of our audience today is going to be returning to a brick and mortar business in the next
Mm.
30 to 60 days, and 71%, the majority, are not. And I know it's because some of them happen to be in job transition, but it's always
Yeah.
interesting
Right.
to see results
It
like
is.
this.
It is.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, that's almost a third.
mhm. So, in terms of, we spent a little bit of time talking about leadership. I think whether we are currently employed as a practitioner, as a leader of some sort, or we are in job transition, we're considering at some point in the next however many weeks or months, we may be returning to a physical space.
Hmm.
Would you talk just a little bit more about that, the physical space bucket that you were mentioning before, and the challenges that that poses in this new world of work?
Yeah, what we're starting to notice is organizations are preparing to bring people back in some shape or form. And what I've read about is mostly in phased types of approaches, but considering what do they need to do to the physical space to make it safe so that people will feel comfortable and be willing to come back to some form of a building setup.
Right.
So they're looking at, the desk space setup. They're reevaluating their facility management to make sure the cleaning procedures are there.
Mhm.
They're looking at having to have PPE available if people want it. So do they want a mask? Are they going to require a mask?
And
And
PPE,
even in some
that's,
situations,
sorry to interrupt, PPE,
I'm
that,
sorry,
I
that's
just want
my
to make
old,
sure we're,
yeah,
yeah.
I was also an emergency medical technician for 15 years. So that's my shortcut for
Of
that.
course, I'm beginning to think that there isn't anything you haven't done.
Oh no, there's plenty. It's personal protective equipment,
Right.
right? So it's masks, it's gloves, it's sanitizer, it's all those fun things.
Is it available, and do
Um,
people know how to use it effectively? There's an
yeah,
education behind that,
right.
right? Yeah.
Right. And, if you think about over the recent years, we've seen a lot of like the Purell things on the wall popping up.
Yeah.
But now it's maybe mandatory,
Right.
right? So I always crack up for the old bathroom signs that said employees must wash their hands. Okay, everybody's supposed to wash their hands. Maybe we wouldn't have been in this mess. But yeah, so, that's the kind of changes to make sure all those things are available, what will be required. In some instances, we know in the healthcare profession, they're required to take a temperature before they come in. China is monitored, so talk about Big Brother. They have an ability to monitor where people are, if you've been tested for COVID or not, right? So all of those pieces are starting to be discussed and trying to figure out what does that look like and what are the implications when you come back to the workplace.
Right. So I want to make sure as we keep an eye on the clock and we're moving closer and closer to 12:30 Central Time, I want to make sure it's really important to me that we are providing people who are here for this conversation with some actionable takeaways, some resources
Mhm.
that they can look into following our conversation. So we've identified, I think, three really distinct buckets that you
Yeah.
talk about being challenges as we look at what the future of work is going to look like as people return to the workplace. Um, so now how can we dance with these challenges? What are some of the things that people can do immediately following this conversation to begin to engage their leaders, or if they are leaders themselves, sort of
hmm
set the tone and set the policy for what work is going to look like in the weeks and months to come?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost is just to continue to be informed about the changes and what's going on. One of my favorite organizations that has been offering, and new for them, free access to their conferences and webinars and even some of their research reports is Conference Board. A fellow professor adjunct with me over at NYU is on staff at Conference Board. But they have been having some really great free webinars online, of course, and bringing in panels of leaders from different organizations talking about what they're doing so you can get some ideas about how to do this stuff if you find yourself in that position. And they are also providing resources through those webinars so you can find additional information. So Conference Board is one of my favorites, and there's actually one coming up, I want to say next week. So
Okay.
I'll include that link.
Hmm.
But there are other organizations that are also offering, that seems to be the new banter in social media is what does the new world look like?
Hmm.
Because I think now that the restrictions are starting to be lifted in different states across the country, organizations are realizing at some point we have to figure this out.
Right. And what works for one organization may not work for another, right? So
Absolutely right.
I know you and I have done a lot of coaching and helping individuals be introspective. Organizations are going to have to be very introspective about who they serve, how they serve them, and what's going to
Yes.
make the most sense for them, while also, I would imagine, taking into account the greater good, what's good for us as a society and as a community of folks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any thoughts? As I mentioned, I'd imagine we'd have some people who are in between jobs and in
hmm
job transition right now. Do you have any thoughts on how the individual in job transition, as they are interviewing for positions, which, by the way, are still very much available, regardless of the
They
headlines that
are.
you may be reading, as
That's
they
right.
continue to interview with organizations who are figuring out some of these questions themselves? Do you have
hmm
any advice for those candidates in terms of what questions they can ask or what conversation they can have with these potential employers around what the future of work is going to look like in those spaces?
Yeah, I think in this situation, it's an opportunity to showcase your flexibility, to showcase, what new opportunities can be found, to ask questions around, what are you learning from this
Mm,
extraordinary time? What new opportunities have popped up?
yeah.
What did you think you couldn't do that you could? Those kinds of things. So it'll showcase your critical thinking skills, your positive, optimistic attitude, and how you might contribute to that. What organizations are finding is, and they're looking for more of, as we knew this would happen, those social emotional skills where you can relate to people in any situation,
Mhm.
virtually, physically, new roles, new skills, whatever that looks like. So that versatility is a big piece. And so now is a really great time to highlight and showcase all that you can offer to help organizations get back on track, to figure out what their next steps are, to ask really thoughtful questions about what the organization has been through and where they're going, and want to be part of that, you know, solution.
I love that because at least for the time being, it seems to me that all scripts are out the window. Prior to
Yep.
this, you go in as a candidate, you know what questions they're going to ask, they know what to expect, they have their responses ready, you have your responses ready, and it's not very interesting.
Yep.
So,
No, it's
you
not.
you make it interesting by surprising one or the other side with questions that they don't expect. And I think
That's
now
right.
nobody yet has a script for how to answer these questions. So just as they might ask you, well,
They don't.
what values and skills are you going to bring to this new world of work, or however they put it, and it's going to make you think. um, any question that you were to ask them, I would think that they wouldn't have a ready response for.
They probably won't. Right. So it's learning to dance in the moment,
Yeah.
right? Which is our leadership challenge too.
Yes.
There's no playbook.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. I always say that this 30 minutes flies by, but it's by design. We want to give people just enough to be inspired and then continue with their day, because people have stuff going on. I wouldn't imagine
Yep.
people were sitting home all morning waiting for this to happen without something else to do.
That's right.
Um, if Well, first of all, this has been so beneficial. I really appreciate you spending time with us today, Maryanne. If and when people want to follow up with you, because I'm sure they will, to learn more about the services that your company offers, to pick your brain on the future of work, maybe ask you about your experience with hacking HR, because you've done quite a
Hmm.
lot with that community,
We have.
how can people find you online?
The best way to get me really is through LinkedIn. You can certainly go to my website. Website is really more for information, just to, talk about what I have to offer. But you want to connect, follow me on LinkedIn, send me a LinkedIn invite. Love to meet new people.
Mhm.
I think Michael Nadler and I actually already connected. So
Great.
that's great from last time. Yeah.
He is a regular.
But
He is
yeah,
a regular at
yeah,
these.
he's, yeah, very impressive. There you go. Yeah. So I'd love to connect on LinkedIn, and you can follow my posts and articles and fun stuff like that.
Wonderful. We will, as I mentioned, follow up via email with everybody who attended today with links to the resources that you have shared, some links back to your organization and the services that you offer, the leadership coaching and everything that you're doing today. I really appreciate it, and I'm so inspired by. Hopefully, everybody else was inspired by this conversation as well. If you did enjoy it, I would love for you to come back to a future Harmony Insights lunch date. We have a few lined up for this week that are going to be fantastic.
Oh,
The
yeah.
sort of the accidental theme of the week happens to be around connection, kindness, community, a few different
Mm,
things. For example, what are your own smoke signals when you need help? How do other people know that you need help? And are you allowing them in? Including, or in addition to those, one that I'm really excited about on Friday, coming up here on the 15th, I'm trying something entirely new. I haven't seen it done before, and when Erich tries something new, you know something's up, because I like things routine
uh,
and predictable. But I'm going out on a limb and trying something that I'm calling a pop-up panel,
Love it.
and people are going to come together on Friday, and in the moment, I'm going to invite people who volunteer to be a panelist. I'm going to invite them into the spotlight for a conversation on meaningful connection.
Look at
And
you go. I love that.
I don't know how it's gonna unfold, but I know I want people there to be a part of it. So whether you want to share your thoughts on meaningful connection, or you just want to be in the audience and kind of witness how this this all unfolds, I hope people will join us. And you can find all of that detail at harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates. Again, Maryanne, thank you so much for joining us
This
today.
was great. Thanks, Eric, so much.